the meeting because we don't have a lot of time. First, I need to change my, let's see, my view so I can see everybody on it. Gallery. So I'm going to ask everybody to quickly introduce themselves. I'm Steve Geller, former senator, Broward County Commissioner, and chair of the SFRPC. Aralda, will you introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Aralda Agoli. I'm program manager at the SFRPC for community outreach and economic development.
Randy?
Randy DeShazo, Deputy Director and Director of Economic Development and Research.
Isabel?
Isabel Cosio-Carballo, Executive Director of the South Florida Regional Planning Council. It's great to see all of you.
George?
George Lanza, Chief of Staff, Miami-Dade Beacon Council.
Whoever is Office of Innovation and Economic Development.
James.
Hi, James Constam, Director of Economic Development for Miami-Dade County. I'll change my name. Thank you. On the
You're a
screen, that
whole
is.
office, James. You're a whole office.
Rick?
Good morning, Rick Beasley, Career Source, South Florida. Good to join you all.
Thank you. John?
Good morning, John Rennie, professor at Florida Atlantic University.
And John will be our main guest speaker today. Corrine?
Good afternoon or morning, Karine Boutros, Executive Director of the Broward Workshop.
Christina?
Good morning, Christina Miskis, Principal Planner with the South Florida Regional Planning Council.
Tabitha?
Hi, good morning. Tabitha Fazzino, Chief Intergovernmental Affairs, Family and Community Engagement for Miami-Dade Schools.
Anna Carolina?
Good morning, Carolina Maran, Chief of Resiliency, South Florida Water Management District.
I never knew your first name was Anna. I've known you for years and years, and I always thought you were just Carolina.
Yeah,
So,
my name is Anna Carolina.
if you want me to change it, how
No.
I refer to you in the future, please let me know. Baron?
Hi, my name is Baron Lindenberg. I am the Senior Director for Sponsored Programs at the College of the Florida Keys. I'm here representing the President and CEO, Dr. Jonathan Guevara. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And Kara's AI note taker, do you want to introduce yourself? I'd love to see what happens here. All right, I gave her a chance.
Yeah.
Wait, she might.
Respond. Okay, do we have other RSVPs that are not yet here?
Councilmember Goldberg just emailed me. He's just finished up a call and we'll jump on.
Okay.
And I know, like I mentioned earlier, there's a couple more people who have RSVP that's attending, but maybe they'll join later. I'm not sure.
And maybe they're still waiting on the Microsoft Teams.
I sent an email to everyone, yeah.
Okay. In reference to the agenda, the first thing that we need to do, I think all of you know what the CEDS is, but in case I see a couple of new people. We are the Economic Development District. I got it right, finally. The Economic Development District for the Economic Development Administration of the United States Department of Commerce for South Florida.
That's it.
And I finally got it all right. As such, one of the things that the SFRPC does is, in its capacity as the Economic Development District, is we every 5 years have to create a comprehensive economic development strategy for South Florida. Any federal agency under Department of Commerce that grants funds when they are looking at funding projects will look first at our CEDS report, and any program requesting funding should be referencing our CEDS report, stating how they are in compliance with our CEDS, which is our both state of where we are now and our vision of where we want to be. We do that every 5 years. We are required to do annual updates as well. We have just submitted yesterday to each of you, and I apologize for submitting it on such short notice, a lengthy CEDS update. Randy DeShazo will go through that momentarily as soon as I'm
John,
done.
can you I'm not sure how that happened. Can you stop sharing your screen?
Yeah, because you're our next speaker, John.
Sorry, I'm
And-
trying to stop sharing, but it's for whatever
I have no
reason.
idea how you were able to share, first of all. This is so weird.
It's not saying that I'm sharing. Oh, wait, here we go. All right,
Okay.
sorry about that. I apologize.
No problem. Thank you, John. And I see Mr. Steiger's on. Ron, can you introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, sorry for being a bit tardy. Ron Steiger, I'm the CFO of Miami-Dade County Public Schools.
Thank you, sir. And so Randy will do a quick run through on the proposed report that I assume none of you have read yet. And then we will be taking a vote not to adopt it, but to open up the 30-day comment period for public comment for the CEDS. So that is the action item. Randy?
Yeah, so the action item is actually to recommend to the council to open up the 30-day period.
I'm sorry, that's correct. When is our SFRPC meeting?
Let's see.
21st.
Go on.
Okay, so what the action item will be a recommendation of the CEDS committee to the SFRPC to initiate a 30-day public comment period on this document that's in front of you today. Randy, take it away.
Sure.
And I'd like to welcome Councilmember Goldberg here. And I think I saw Bob Swindell. Is that correct? Bob, are you on?
I am, Senator. Thank you.
Okay, Bob, could you introduce yourself quickly?
Sure. I'm Bob Swindell, President and CEO of the Greater Fort Lauderdale Alliance, the Broward County's economic development organization.
Thank you. And Carrie, can you introduce yourself quickly?
Yes, Kerry Goldberg, council member at the Regional Planning Council and president of Diversified Realty Development Co. here in Deerfield Beach.
Thank you. Randy, back to you.
All right, great. Thank you. We're gonna move along fairly quickly with this because there's a lot else to do today. But the purpose of the annual update is simply to inform the US EDA of what has changed in the region. And so there are two pieces to the report. The first is some economic indicators to show EDA how the economy has changed, and as a reference point with respect to our recovery from the COVID recession. And in general, we've seen a lot of employment growth, especially in several key sectors. The high cost of housing continues to present challenges for access to labor and the costs borne by workers with high housing and transportation costs. That's kind of like the very quick overview. Erolda will mention a few of the updates we have from our partners. If you've not submitted any comments to Erolda yet on your recent activities, please do so, because those are important from EDA's perspective. All right, if we can advance to the next slide. So all of these things I think are not going to be terribly unfamiliar to you. As I just got done mentioning, affordability continues to be a major issue. Infrastructure is lagging, and a big part of the struggle that we face, of course, is the enormous costs posed by congestion on the economic vitality of the region, which is one of the reasons why we're looking at TOD and higher quality transit, because there are costs to everyone, not just people who take transit, from all the excess driving and congestion that we have in our region. And so the point of our business case is look at different ways of reducing that congestion. All right, so we'll just keep on moving along. All right, I think you skipped one. All right. So one of the key points I want to make here is that a lot of population moved around quite a bit. There was a lot of exodus from South Florida as a result of COVID. A lot of that has started to reverse, and people are coming back. What you'll see throughout the presentation are occasional references to Palm Beach. They are not part of our economic development district. They're there because they're a large part of our region, and we sometimes like to use them as a benchmark to know what else is going on more generally in South Florida.
They are
Right, we'll
also
go ahead.
included in the, I forget what the census area, SMSA or whatever it's called.
MSA.
Yes, the very large MSA, right?
MSA,
And
right.
then probably the most fluid of all of our counties has been Monroe, but you can see that will, of course, even out as there are absolute limits on the number of housing units they can build. Let's go ahead and move on. All right. So our regional gross domestic product continues to grow. We are maintain our spot as the largest metropolitan economy in Florida, and I think that will remain unchallenged for many years to come. So you see some moderate growth here, but not spectacular growth. Go ahead and move on to the next one. Probably one of the biggest challenges faced across the United States and will be showcased in our upcoming Silver Tsunami conference is that we continue to see drops in labor force participation. Our region actually has a slightly higher labor force participation rate. We are continue to be a major draw for international migrants, and that is reflected in our labor profile. But nevertheless, there is a continuous downward trend that we need to keep in mind. And this is not only because of the aging out of the workforce. There are a lot of people who are between 25 and 54, especially men, who are dropping out of the labor force for a variety of reasons. We can come back to that later. All right, we'll go ahead and move on.
Randy?
Yes, sir.
I'm sorry, Randy, go back on that one. Labor force participation versus employment numbers. I mean, I've not heard the term labor force participation before, so.
Is that the percentage of the labor force that of the population that's actually working?
Yeah.
So Commissioner Goldberg, those are in percentages.
Right, and so that's the scale on the left is like what percentage of the population is participating in the labor force of that age group. So it's like 17 to 65, I think.
I believe
that's correct. And how does that relate to the number of jobs that are available out there?
It doesn't.
So they're slightly disconnected in the sense that the number of jobs is driven by the demand for goods and services, and you can think of labor force participation as the supply of people who are interested or able to work, and so you can have relatively low participation rates, especially if your population is older, or if you're like some of the Arab Emirates, that you have like a very high demand for services, but a very small population base. So you're importing a lot of people to work in your economy. And in this case, this is simply reflective of the supply, if you will, of the population that is interested in and able to work. And sorry if I just sort of repeated myself, but please let me know if that clears it up for you.
Yeah, we have to run through this. Please continue.
Okay, I'm happy to come back. I'm sorry if it wasn't clear. All right. So median household income continues to rise, but not remarkably. It is keeping slightly ahead of inflation. And so that's my key point with this particular slide. We'll go ahead and move on. And then probably the most significant element I want to bring to your attention today is that the median house listing price, this is probably the most comprehensive data set I could get for our 3 counties, appears to have cooled off a bit, which is good from the perspective of overall affordability, but it is still a bit too high for many people to qualify for a mortgage. So I go on. Weekly wages are up, but still haven't reached 2021's peak for the counties that we're tracking here. So it's good news, but it's perhaps not as strong as we would like it to be. So in some sense, we're still recovering from the COVID recession. All right, move on. All right, unemployment rates. So for those people who are in the labor force who are interested in working but are unable to find work one way or another, this is the people who become part of the unemployment rate. And as you can see here, it remains fairly constant in over the last 5 or so years, and years past it used to be a much higher rate. So overall, Florida is a more competitive employment marketplace, if you will.
Isn't
Right.
under 3.5 basically considered full employment?
I think
Or
it's
under
it's
3.0?
considered low unemployment. I don't know if I would call it full. Like I think there's like always some frictional unemployment. So it's a little, I think the full employment number is a little lower than that, if I recall correctly.
Okay, I think it's actually 3, but okay, please proceed.
Yeah.
We don't have time.
That's fine. That's fine. You're right. All right, go on. Okay, so then we end this portion of it with a 2-year outlook. Our primary concerns are workforce shortages, especially in the high skill sectors, and that will remain a significant part of our challenges in terms of developing the regional economy, especially as housing prices continue to be persistently high, especially for people in lower wage income, lower wage jobs. Okay. All right. And then Eraldo, if you want to just give like a quick 2-minute update on what projects we've received updates on, and that would be great.
Sure. Well, like Senator Geller mentioned earlier,
And I'm going to briefly interrupt. I see Juliet Ruack has joined us. Juliet, will you very briefly introduce yourself?
Thank you, Senator. This is Juliet Rolack with Florida Power and Light Company, Director of External Affairs.
Thank you. And Dan Lindblade has joined us. Dan, will you quickly introduce yourself?
Yeah, my apologies for being late, Senator.
No
Dan
problem.
Lindblade, Greater Fort Lauderdale Chamber of Commerce.
Thank you. Back to you.
oh, perfect. So I'll make it quick. As I've mentioned in my emails, if you have, as Senator Geller mentioned, we like to include regional projects, their updates, outcomes, what's going on in our region, and how is that affecting our the economic development portion, or workforce, or infrastructure and whatnot. Like for instance, we received projects from Career Source of Broward, and they've listed all their projects with their outcomes, how many let's say apprenticeship they graduated, they spent $2.5 million on the program, had 305 individuals participate, out of which 300 found jobs at a certain payment rate. So those are the kind of projects that we're actually looking for. So if you haven't sent them to us, we greatly appreciate if you could just share anything that you have. I know Miami-Dade County has shared something with us, so thank you, James Chessie. But that's pretty much it. So what it is it's, as Senator Geller said, it's a foot in the door.
Yeah, this is a
applying.
big deal because we are the economic development district for U.S. Department of Commerce, Economic Development Agency, and any grants proposed to U.S. Department of Commerce should be in compliance, and they will review that against the CEDS. So this really is a big deal.
And your projects need to align with the CEDS goals and objectives that are listed in the project template that I shared with you. So that's about it.
Okay. And again, on this topic, before we move on, are there any questions first? Not seeing any questions. I believe everybody now, Eraldo, when you sent the report to everybody. Did that include what Randy just showed us, the PowerPoint, or that was a separate document that was sent?
So
to
I
everybody?
sent the full draft report,
Right.
and whatever was in the PowerPoint, those graphs and that information is in the report. I will share the PowerPoint as well.
Yeah,
with
please share the PowerPoint with
Absolutely.
everybody. And when you do that, even though you've already sent them the full CEDS, resend it to everybody, please. And if there's any comments, again, I will be asking for a motion now. The procedure is we will be recommending, this committee, the CEDS committee, will be recommending to the South Florida Regional Planning Council to open up a 30-day public comment period on the CEDS draft report. So is there a motion to recommend to the SFRPC that we send this out for 30-day public comment period?
Senator, I make a motion that we do that.
Thank you. Moved by Dan Lindblade, seconded by Carrie Goldberg. Is there any discussion? Is there any discussion? Seeing no discussion, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Is there any opposition? Is there any opposition? Show it adopted unanimously. Again, the SFRPC meeting is what day, Isabel? Next week sometime.
Monday.
Oh, next Monday.
Yes.
And I am quite confident that they will recommend that we open this up for 30-day comment period. If there are any comments, please let me know. And Randy has texted me that full employment is considered anything less than 5%. So I was fairly confident that the 3.5% or 3% is considered generally full employment. Before our next, we're about to move from this to our main speaker today, John Rennie. But before we do, you heard Randy DeShazo briefly mention the silver tsunami. Every year, the South Florida Regional Planning Council and the Treasure Coast Regional Planning Council hold one major conference. In addition to that, the SFRPC holds one major conference. So we have two major conferences a year, but the big one is us and the Treasure Coast. This year, the focus is on the silver tsunami, which all of you know enough about just from the title, but we have a group of amazing speakers. It is an all-day meeting, and you need to register quickly because I can assure you that we will fill up the room and have to stop accepting participants. So Isabel, if you can quickly give the details, when it is, where it is.
Yes, absolutely. And okay, and we'll send again the information. I had instructed staff to send it to the entirety of the CEDS committee, the constant contact that went out last week. So the name of the event is Preparing for the Silver Tsunami, Planning and Policy Solutions for Southeast Florida's Communities. And it's going to be held on November 15th. It's going to be held at Florida Atlantic University in Boca Raton from 9 to 4. And we'll start with registration. Then we'll get started around 9:25. It will go to 4. And we have, I think, a pretty impressive agenda with
statewide and national speakers.
Yes, we have Governor Kotkamp, Lieutenant Governor Kotkamp coming. He's now with Florida Tax Watch, and he's going to be there. And we also have a research professor named Angela Antonelli, who's with the Georgetown Center for Retirement. And we have our aligned area agents. They just call them AAAs, area agencies on aging. So, yes, and it's going to be looking at transportation solutions, housing and land use planning solutions. We're going to be looking at healthcare and supportive services for an aging population, and very excited about it. And we will make sure to send you the draft agenda along with the update. The Treasure Coast is taking the registrations on their website. So the Constant Contact has that link to take you there as well.
And
So
I
after
believe
this
that
meeting
there is
is
no
over, we'll
charge to
send it back
attend.
to
Is
you.
that correct?
The charge is $75.
Oh, there is charge.
Includes
Correct.
parking. It just basically covers
The
a
food.
portion of the rental and food and the recording of the meeting, since it will not be live cast.
Okay. But I guarantee you that we will have more people that want to attend than will fit in the room. So we're going to have to cut off registration when we're full. So please register for that early.
And we're excited about it. It's going to be really good.
Thank you. And now, Randy, if you can open up the discussion on the transit-oriented development, which, as you saw, was referenced in the CEDS report. And then if you can introduce our main speaker, Mr. Rennie.
Of course. So as many of you know, we've
Professor
been
Rennie.
Yes. As many of you know, staff has been working with you in various subcommittee settings to start putting together a business case for improved transit and transit-oriented development. We've held meetings to help us prepare some case studies with the Atlanta Beltline, with staff who work on the light rail for Dallas, and also with the Urban Land Conservancy in Denver to talk more about how we might better finance the affordable aspects of TOD. And so we will be continuing to do work on these particular aspects of transit and TOD, but keeping in mind Dr. Rennie's short time frame, he can only stay on the call till about 11:15. I want to go ahead and introduce him, and he has a very interesting presentation on transit-oriented development. He's a professor at urban and regional planning at the Florida Atlantic University. And I believe you also do a lot of work in artificial intelligence. And I also understand you have done consulting work on TOD itself. So with that, I would like to welcome you, and hopefully we can share your screen and hear your presentation. So thank you.
And Professor Rennie, so what's your view on our AI note taker? No, just kidding. Let's go on.
Well, thank you, and it's good to see many familiar faces. I haven't seen in a while. Dan, it's good to see you, and feel free to call me John. Let me share my screen. I have a relatively new Mac and a new widescreen monitor, so I was trying to get things worked out earlier and inadvertently shared my screen. So let me see if I can get this to work properly. So, all right. Can you guys see my screen? Oh, I got to hit the full screen view. Can you see it there now?
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, let me just kind of start out and say that I've worked on a TOD project with SFRPC. It's been a few years now, probably about 4 or 5 years. I worked closely with Isabel and Christina. I think Araldo was still at ULI at the time, and we also worked on another TOD academy to educate folks what TOD is. So I've been at FAU for 9 years. I'm actually leaving at the end of the year, and I will be going over to Tulane University. I'll be the director of their real estate development program, and still, plan to have a very active role here in South Florida, because that position will be drawing upon students nationally, and research nationally. And Florida, South Florida, is one of the leading places of growth. So while I've had a wonderful time at FAU, I'm looking forward to this opportunity at Tulane. I also, as Randy mentioned, I done some consulting work for leading developers here in South Florida, like Related and others. And then I've also worked as a real estate developer and investor. I developed a TOD project in Denver, Colorado. It was 21 acres, and sold that in 2020, and have a private equity fund, and we invest in TOD developments around the United States. That's called Priority Funds. And so what I want to talk about here from your perspective of comprehensive economic development strategy. And my wife, as some of you know, has worked in economic development for a number of years, many years, and has worked on CEDS plans and strategies, including I think the previous one for you guys.
No, this one.
Yeah.
No, she helped us with this one that we did.
Oh, the
other
current one. Oh,
Yeah,
great. Yeah. So
20
my wife helped with the current strategy, and
Yeah,
so
'cause she
I
ran
have
me
an
there for 5 years.
Yeah, okay. So I have an understanding of economic development. But I did want to take a moment to kind of actually, and I added a couple slides in here if I can figure out how to advance the screen, about like what is transit-oriented development. It's a term we've heard of, but let's all take a break for a moment. And I want you to think about the last time that you went on vacation. And I want you to think about the last time that you went to like a city for a vacation, right? Not going to the beach, not going to the mountains, but what kind of a city did you go to, right? And the chances are is that it probably looked like one of these places here, because these are some of the highest tourist destinations in the world. Okay, St. Mark's Piazza in Venice, Central Amsterdam. This is one of the leading tourist destinations in Australia, where my wife and I used to live, called Fremantle. And this is Bruges, okay? And this is in Auckland, New Zealand, down where the America's Cup was. And a couple of these other places I kind of interspersed here are a couple of TODs that I studied extensively over the years. This is in South Orange, New Jersey, and this is in Oakland, California, called Fruitvale. And what I want to point out about these TODs and these, popular tourist destinations is that what Christopher Lineberger, who some of you may know, he calls them walk-ups, okay? Walkable urban places. And these walkable urban places are designed around people. And you could see that, if you're walking, going, 2 or 3 miles an hour, right? You could differentiate the difference between the different colors in the plants, the furniture in each of these photos, the designs, the unique designs in the bollards here. Some of them have a triangle in the middle, some of them have a circle in the middle. Obviously, you've got the bike paths and the brick pavers and the different color in the pavers themselves, right? When we design these kinds of places, which you see in our region, in our walkable places, right? You see a design to detail. And that is not really how we've designed most of our cities in the United States since World War II, which have been designed around the automobile. And the automobile, consumes a lot of land, okay? This right here is an old photo, from Miami-Dade, where, we've actually built the train station, sometimes, right in the middle of a highway where you can't walk there very easily. Of course, we have a lot of sprawling single-family housing developments. This is in Rock Creek, close to where I used to live when I was going to school at the University of Colorado. And then I want to point out this sign right here. This is close to where I went to graduate school at Rutgers. This is in Edison, New Jersey. If you were to be walking along this street, going that same speed that you might be walking in St. Mark's Piazza in Venice, you actually may not even notice this sign is 20 feet over your head, right? Because these signs are designed for people to be driving 40, 50, 60 miles an hour, okay? What's the problem with this? Well, the problem is that it's incredibly consumptive of land. It's incredibly generates a ton of carbon emissions, which makes us as a nation, some of the leading emitters of carbon dioxide. It generates particulate matters, which is unsafe for breathing, right? But I'm not gonna be here to tell you, right, that what we've done in the past, you know, needs to be completely destroyed and bulldozed. That's not the point of my presentation. The point of my presentation is that in the United States, we have like 4,700 train stations, right? I forget exactly how many are in South Florida, but if you look at those train stations, right, you all know how expensive it is to build infrastructure. And so, you know, the Wave streetcar in Fort Lauderdale was turned down because it was too expensive to build, right? I think it was something like, sometimes that these costs are over, you know, like $100 million, you know, for these infrastructure projects. And it gets folks, you know, to say, well, we can't really afford that. Well, what about all the train stations that already exist in our region that are not designed for transit-oriented development? Transit-oriented development, and I put a couple of these slides in, Aralda and Randy, because I wanted to take a step back and explain what it is and why it's important. It's typically within a quarter to a half mile of a train station, and it's creating these walkable places. You can take a place that is not walkable and very much auto oriented, and many of these places, in fact, most of our train stations in South Florida are like that, as opposed to a transit oriented development. And what you could see is that you know, those places can transition to a place like this, which is, you know, this is in Delray Beach, which shows that we can create street life and restaurants and vibrant places where people want to go shopping and dining and spend their time. This is in Meisner Park in Boca Raton, a very popular destination that was remade through a redevelopment and is now a wonderful example. And why do we want to do this? Well, from a transportation perspective, if you take the stations that are like this, and we call these transit-oriented developments, what we find is that more than half of trips around these transit-oriented developments, again, this is about a third of all the stations in the US, are made by transit and walking and cycling. Whereas if you look at the drivable only places, we'll call them transit adjacent developments, it's only about 15.6% of commute trips are made with transit, walking, and cycling. And then there are some stations that I call hybrids, which are kind of in the middle, and you could see the data in the middle there. And, you know, vehicle ownership per household is corresponding to that, right? When you have these more walkable places, and let's call this, you know, downtown Miami or Brickell, or emerging, we're seeing these locations like in places like Coconut Grove, maybe Coral Gables, Dadeland, you know, places like Fort Lauderdale, downtown West Palm Beach, right? These are probably the few examples that we have in our region. And so if we've already spent all that money to build the train station, what we need to do is to figure out how do we incentivize the development around that area to make sure that we are getting people out of their cars and they are taking the transit and they are walking and maybe riding alternative modes like bikes or scooters or whatever it might be. In transit-oriented developments that are highly designed, the property values are worth a lot more than in the low-quality transit-oriented or transit-adjacent developments. So the higher property values in these TODs generate more property taxes and more sales taxes, which is a better return on investment for the government. So it makes a lot of sense to think about investing in ways to do this. Also, we all know in South Florida, one of our biggest challenges is affordable housing. And surprisingly, people who live in transit-oriented developments have a lower household expenditure on the combination of housing and transportation compared to people that live in more suburban locations. And that's because they don't need to own as many cars. And so they can save a little bit, save actually a lot of money on their transportation costs. That sometimes translates into slightly higher rents, okay? But one of the things about those higher rents is that they tend to be higher on a per square foot basis, and the people who live in these particular locations are consuming less space. So if you have an apartment in a TOD, it may be 800 square feet, where that same apartment in a suburban area may be 1,200 square feet. So you may be spending, $2,000 a month on rent, right? But if you were living in that suburban location, you may be spending that same $2,000. You're just getting more space in the suburban location. In the urban location, in the TOD location, we find that people walk to the restaurants and the cafes and they live there. They what we call self-select. They choose to live in these locations. We're not trying to force people to live anywhere they don't want to live. The problem is there's a pent-up demand to live in these places, and there's not enough housing supply. So we need to allow developers to build more of these things, because unfortunately, a lot of zoning restrictions do not allow for these to be built. And that translates into lower transportation costs, which means they might spend a little more on transportation, but overall their total budget on housing and transportation is lower, which means they have more money for other things, like maybe young people going back to get a graduate degree, or maybe they might invest more in their retirement savings. In fact, I did an analysis once, and this was inspired by some numbers I saw in Australia, that if you took the savings that you save here, right, and then you invest that in your 401k, over the course of a 25 to 30-year working career, you actually have $1 million extra in your retirement savings if you invest that, getting a typical 5 to 7% return in your 401k. So now what do you do, right? Why is this important to you, overseeing economic development strategies? Well, there is a role for the public sector and the private sector to invest, to enable these underutilized stations that are already operating today to become more vibrant destinations for future jobs and future housing and future retail and restaurants and places for people to enjoy themselves. So the private sector, and this includes for-profit developers and not-for-profit developers, and I've done a lot of work with the South Florida Community Land Trust, which is also working on this topic in Broward and Miami-Dade as well. They look to acquire land for development. The private sector can assist with building infrastructure. Typically, that's more of a government thing, but there's a lot of infrastructure that's built by the private sector in terms of sewer and water and things of that nature. The private sector is really good at the placemaking, the photos that I saw you, a lot of that happens in the US through the private sector. Vertical development, building the buildings. And this has, been enabled through the 2017 tax code, opportunity zones, value creation through Brightline. What does the public sector need to do? Well, they need to sometimes provide funding for transportation infrastructure, and that can happen through value capture. They also can help to promote placemaking and provide some development subsidies, for example, affordable housing. There's more than that. I'm just kind of simplifying it. I want to show you two examples of some private initiatives that one is a company I worked for in Australia that put together the Perth Rail Link Trust, and they acquired sites all over Perth, Australia, and I helped them identify and buy these properties for private transit-oriented development. And there's a lot of examples like that here in the US as well. In Denver, and I think Randy mentioned the Urban Land Conservancy. They are one of the leaders in acquiring land to preserve for not just affordable housing, but also community centers, daycare centers, senior centers, and affordable office space as well, but predominantly affordable housing. Infrastructure, right? We'll talk a little bit about kind of infrastructure here. And what we'll see is that we have tools that the federal government have established through the U.S. Department of Transportation, and Brightline has taken advantage of some of these tools, but this is something that your committee could help to promote. One is called TIFIA and one is called RIF. TIFIA, both are TIFIA is more for transit and RIF is more for intercity passenger railroad financing. They help to finance gaps that are inherent in a lot of these TODs that the private sector won't necessarily build on their own. They come in the form of loans that are low interest loans that often have to be repaid, but can often be repaid with a dedicated tax, a property tax, sometimes called a value capture tax or a there's another term I'm blanking on at the moment. A TIF tax, tax increment financing tax.
I was going to say TIF.
Yeah. And once once these projects are up and running, a lot of times these TIFs pay off these loans. And so Smart Growth America has been a bit of a leader in kind of helping provide guidance on this. So I would highly recommend reaching out to Locus, which is a division of Smart Growth America that helps real estate developers.
By the way, John, I don't know how long your presentation is, but
okay,
I know
I'll
you have
wrap
a
it up
hard
and
stop. I was going to say, I'm sure there's going to be questions.
Yeah.
So please try and leave 10 or 15 minutes for
I
questions.
will, for sure. I'm almost done.
Okay.
There's also this resource that the U.S. Department of Treasury put out, on opportunity zones, which apply to those particular locations. The U.S. Department of Transportation also funded this tool called the todresources.org, which has lots and lots of funding opportunities and financing opportunities around TOD. But this is an important kind of a theoretical consideration, and this was done by my colleagues in Australia, looking at what they call the entrepreneurial rail model. The conventional model that we've followed in the US is where we kind of build and we estimate how much transit is going to be generated. We build and we finance the transportation, and then we try to figure out what happens with the land use later. That's why we have so many train station areas in South Florida and across the US that are really not transit oriented at all, as I showed earlier. The entrepreneurial rail model is basically what Brightline has done. They've looked at to say, what kind of an environment do we want to create around our stations? They incorporate real estate development into the construction and the building of the infrastructure itself, right? And then that creates its own demand for generating transit ridership in addition to what's already there. This right here gets into a little bit more detail about the left side, which is fully privately led. Now, in the US, we did this, over 100 years ago. We went to a fully publicly led system, which, if you think about it, it's kind of like almost a Soviet era kind of a thing that we adopted in the United States, where the government builds all the infrastructure and then that's it, right? We pay for it. It loses money each year. We need to move the pendulum back to the left, bring the private sector back in. We can use value capture to make that happen. And when we do that, there is a tremendous amount of a land value uplift. The project I worked on for SFRPC did estimates of what that could actually look like in South Florida. And there's a lot of guidance on this. Happy to share this presentation with you all so you can get this. But just to kind of wrap it up, there's a case study of Union Station in downtown Denver that utilized a lot of these tools. And it's created a wonderful downtown transit facility. It's created a tremendous amount of development. It was done predominantly with a local developer called Continuum, and it was a collaboration with a lot of these US DOT RIF and TIFIA financing packages. And so the upshot of that project was hotels, 100,000 square feet. This is just in Denver Union Station. That doesn't include the area around it, but just in the station itself, they redeveloped 20 acres of land around it, over 1 million square feet of office, hundreds of thousands of square feet of residences. I mean, literally over 20,000 new apartments and condos in that downtown area. I mean, it's just tremendous. And this was all enabled through kind of this layering approach of these financing tools. So I'm going to stop there and certainly open up for questions. I can talk for hours about this, and it's obviously something that is incredibly detailed and nuanced. But at the same time, I think having an understanding of that is incredibly important for big level policy objectives.
Okay. Wow. John, excellent presentation. I've got like 40 questions, but let me just.
I can stay on. I can stay on for about 20 minutes. I just have to get in the car.
You have a hard stop at 11:15.
Yeah,
First, a simple technical one. I noticed that you had the walking distance quarter to a half mile.
Yeah.
And I know there's been debate over that. Which of those two do you think is more correct? Or is it that they're both correct, but it's just how much people will walk?
I think it's more like a half mile. A half mile is about a 10-minute walk. And so there's in South Florida, we tend to not walk as much in some senses because of the heat or the rain. But the heat can be significantly mitigated with shade trees. I live in a historic neighborhood just south of downtown West Palm Beach, built in the 1920s. And I can tell you, walking around my neighborhood with mature shade trees is way more easy to do than when I walk from the parking lot to my office in Boca Raton, where you have the palm trees that generate zero shade.
Okay. Next question. I'm only going to ask this one, two more, and I'm hoping that there will be other questions from the committee. One of the problems that we've been coming across is the rail corridors. When we met in Atlanta and looked at other cities, the older cities tend to, if they were built prior to the advent of the internal combustion engine, tended to have corridors in place already, either rail corridors or walking corridors, things of that nature, where you could put rail. In South Florida, I mean, particularly east-west, we're finding we don't really have any. It's very, very difficult to find places to put the rail corridors, and any rail corridor in the western part of the counties, you have the same issue. You have 2 rail corridors. They're both in the east, and that's about it. How would you think we can deal with our lack of the space to put the rail?
Yeah, it's a great question. And so I will say there are 2 things that I would recommend looking at. Number one is we have some of the widest arterials of any region in the United States, with the exception of Salt Lake City, right? In Salt Lake City, the Mormons had a rule that you had to be able to turn your cart around in the street, and that's why their roads are so wide.
Grand boulevards.
Yeah, and our corridors are very, very wide. Now they're congested with traffic, and so people politically have a hard time thinking about taking space away from a lane of traffic for a rail. But an average lane of traffic can move about 1,500 cars per hour. A light rail can move 20 to 30,000 people per hour. That's assuming you've got these TODs that generate that kind of demand, so it doesn't happen initially. But what I'll say is that I think what's happening, we saw Tesla last week announce that they're going to be launching their robo taxis and their robo vans. And I think what we might need to do is think about designating a corridor for example, take a lane of traffic or a couple lanes of traffic. I-95 is a perfect example. We've taken lanes of traffic. They're tax lanes, right? We should consider doing that with some of the busy arterial corridors that go, east to west, and say, if you want to drive in this, right, and you're one person filling up a big car, you have to maybe pay a tax, or you got to be in a taxi or a bus or a light rail vehicle. So we need to think about pricing our public space a little bit more efficiently, like we are now thinking about how we price I-95.
My last question, and again, I'm hoping people will be having questions, is the NIMBY factor. Everybody wants to go to heaven. Nobody wants to die. Everybody wants affordable housing. Nobody wants it near them. But particularly the problem is density. Our recent the Sun Sentinel, which continuously advocates for, oh, we need transit, we need this, we need that, has recently come out against the reelection of the mayors of both Fort Lauderdale and Hollywood, supporting their challengers. And the main reason that they have done so is they say, well, they're supporting too much development in the downtown. Personally speaking, as someone who's received awards from the American Planning Association, I would think that's a good thing to have more growth in the downtown area. That's where the growth should be. Mm-hmm. But when even our local progressive newspaper comes out against the mayors who have been leading the charge for the growth in the downtown, you see how strong the NIMBYism is. Do you have any suggestions on that?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. And I actually think it's a pretty simple calculus. Either we decide that we don't want to have any more growth in South Florida, or we direct the growth to certain locations where the affordable housing and the denser housing will be, which should be next to the transit stations, right? Or we just continue to build apartments, closer to the single family developments, which now any developer can do with the Live Local Act, as long as they find a decent piece of commercially zoned property. So do you want to direct growth to where it should be, because it'll support long-term efficiency in our transportation strategy? Or do we want to become like Orange County, California? And if that, sometimes we do I know you guys do these visits to places that have been doing things well, like Charlotte or Dallas or, Denver, places like that. Do a site visit to Orange County, California sometime, because in Orange County, California, there's tremendous amount of density that's not connected to transit. And if you think our traffic in South Florida is bad, I mean, just go there to take a peek at what we could be like in 25 years from now if we don't actually start doing something about it. And that was mind-blowing to me when I went to Orange County, is to say, wow, this is what we could be like. And I hope it doesn't happen here in South Florida.
Yeah. Well, over the last 25 years, Broward County average population growth is 14,000 people per year. So if we're going to want anything affordable, we're going to need to add more housing. Isabel and Baron, you have been discussing things online. Can you bring those up, please?
Oh, yes. Thank you, Senator. I just wanted to mention that we had a very good council staff. We had a good conversation with Randall Vitale, who is fantastic. And Randall made a point of mentioning, in fact, we were trying to explore how to do a study on the subject, which was that many of his middle managers are actually looking for homes with land where they are reasonably purchased at a reasonable purchase price. Because the point was, people change as they go through their life cycle. So once I was in an apartment, and then now I'm in a house. And so for me, the key point of economic development is making sure that you have choices for people, that they can pick from where they want to be, and then that TOD will be there. And then some people might be there when they're young. Some people might go back when they're empty nesters because they want their amenities, but there's still a need for single family homes that can be afforded.
Yeah, if you reset the clock, pre-COVID here in South Florida, I think what you see is that, there wasn't as much of a crunch in terms of affording single family housing units. There not that it was cheap, but it was certainly affordable. We've had such a tremendous amount of population growth in such a short amount of time. It's put a huge constraint on all segments of the housing market, right? So what we're seeing right now is related to that. But if you look at the data from the National Association of Realtors, right, what they are showing is that the demographics of the housing market is still very much an undersupply of smaller units that are in walkable locations. Now, again, that's not to say that we don't need more single-family houses for families with children, but that when you look at the overall needs of the market, typically, we have these locations. Like I said, most our rail stations are completely underutilized surface parking lots around them. That would be a great location to serve that need. That's not saying we don't need the other product in the market. It's just saying that, there's an opportunity to serve that need in the market by building on those underutilized vacant and often surface parking lots near these train stations.
I just think having choices, people need choices. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying, right?
Yeah.
Like we're not trying to solve this. This is not a magic bullet solution to solve all the entirety of the housing market. The housing market is segmented, right? Unfortunately, Broward County is mostly built out, right? So there's not going to be a lot of single family housing developments that are going to be built in Broward County. Miami-Dade County has a bit more available land for development. Palm Beach County as well. Certainly the Treasure Coast does. But in terms of the development opportunities in Broward County, I think that the low-hanging fruit are these underutilized industrial sites, which now, and I think the Live Local Act was a fantastic piece of legislation. In fact, not to get into politics, but when I read the Live Local Act, I said, man, I could see Gavin Newsom writing this policy. It is a policy that appeals to both sides of the political spectrum. And I think it forces a lot of these local governments that do not want to approve anything, and it gives more power to the developers to say, this is what we got to do to serve the market.
Right. Are there additional questions? By the way, John, do we have a copy of your presentation?
I sent a copy, but I'm going to send a revised one to Randy because I added a couple slides at the last minute.
Yes, please do.
Thank you. And we will distribute that to all of the CEDS committee members. Are there additional questions? I had some more, but I wanted to give other people a chance. Anyone else first? Okay, if not, John, one of the other questions that I'd had was in reference to the TIF. The concern with that is I know that some of the local governments have already been planning on grabbing the TIF money. I know the city of Fort Lauderdale has discussed using TIF money for to help fund a tunnel under the New River. Several of the other cities, although Broward County has agreed to pay for the cost of maintaining the rail lines, the actual stations are supposed to be maintained by the cities. And some of the cities have indicated that they're planning on establishing a TIF to maintain the rail stations. How do we get primacy to make sure that we get the TIF before cities get their hands on it for local issues?
Well, I mean, I would say that each proposal, has got to be weighed. I mean, I think there is some merit probably to think about, sinking, the tunnel or whatever the solution is. The South Florida Business Journal did a really good article that just came out on the debates about, the crossing of the New River. And so, if there were to be a TIF used, say, for example, to help finance that, that could be a very good and legitimate use of it. I mean, I think of TIF, as basically just kind of like, I mean, it's basically property tax money. And so I wouldn't say there's necessarily a one size fits all answer to your question. I think that we need to look at, like, is this investment money that we're going to use this TIF for? Is this the highest and best use of our public financing? And I think that what works in Fort Lauderdale, could be very different in Dania Beach, or very different in Miami-Dade, or wherever.
Any other questions for John?
I have a quick question.
Yes, Carolina.
Do you have an analysis in terms of assessing either neighborhoods or cities related to like flood risks and resiliency costs, and how does that translate into some of the urban growth policies?
And
Yeah, we have
Carolina
started to
is
look
with
at
the
that.
South Florida Water Management District.
Yeah.
That's the question on flood.
Okay. Yeah. No, I mean, yeah. So yeah, we started to look at this. I actually helped the South Florida Community Land Trust actually do an analysis for affordable housing sites. And we did look at the flood risk and the resiliency factors. And, it just so happens that, for example, the FEC is built on some of the highest land, because that's where Flagler laid out the tracks, before there was any flood protection. And so, those stations, along that, kind of the northeast corridor there, are on high land. And
That's referred to as the coastal ridge.
Coastal ridge, exactly. So yes, we have started to look at those issues, and they're very important issues. And there's something that now people are calling climate gentrification. They're saying not only are people gentrifying places like Little Haiti, because it's close to downtown, but they're also, buying up land there because it's also high ground and it's less susceptible to long-term flooding. And so that's an issue, obviously, and something I think that, like let's take an example of a place that, imagine we have a place that is very low lying, right? And imagine we can't really elevate, the land very much, right? Well, if we were to create a lot of density, like, you see in Brickell, or, the downtown area of Miami, a lot of times you see the ground floor is now kind of elevated up off the street. And so, those opportunities could certainly help with some of that flooding risk that, is going to be with us, for the rest of our lives.
Okay.
Yeah.
John, I know you have an 11:15. It is
Yeah.
now about to be 11:14. So if you have any 30-second wrap up, you can do it. Otherwise, we'll thank you right now.
Yeah, I just want to say, I'm happy to meet you all and talk to you. I'm a resource, so don't ever hesitate to reach out to me. And good luck with, your committee and what you're doing. It's really important stuff. So thank you so much for inviting me to speak to you today.
Thank you, John.
All right, take care.
Bye-bye. Randy, back to you on the and by the way, anybody that has been to my meetings know they end on time. We are scheduled to 11:30. We will be done at 11:30. Randy, we have reached out we've had a number of meetings already and have other meetings scheduled with transit directors, and we've had great cooperation from Corey Cuff Lonergan, the Broward County Transit Director. Dade, I believe, currently has a vacancy in that position. So it's mostly been Broward, but we've reached out to a number of other cities. Can you summarize or comment on the deficiencies of those meetings?
Yeah, so I think that a lot of the meetings so far have had a sort of general tone or an introductory tone. So Atlanta Beltline gave us an overview of what their current priorities are, especially in terms of enhancing access to trails. With Dallas, Dallas is interesting from the perspective of it's largely low density that they're working their light rail into. Ridership on their system is still fairly low. And while I think there are some lessons to be drawn from them, probably a little bit more in terms of some things we might want to avoid, which is avoiding the very low density kinds of solutions or conceding that right off the bat, and really think a little bit more about higher density solutions. I appreciated John's reference to the Denver solution. One of the things I'd like to follow up a bit more on is to the extent that that is truly portable to our region. The idea of using community land trusts to help um, fill in or purchase land that is due for redevelopment, that will, by separating out the ownership of the land from leasing it out, will help cut down the costs of development, and those costs could be passed on to developers and thereby homeowners at a lower cost than they would at market rates. So that's one thing to consider, even though the potential for that might be very limited, just because there already is a lot of demand for land around transit stops. So in some sense, that's a very good thing that there is such a strong interest. So part of what I'm hoping to do in terms of building up on other case study information is also to dig in a little bit deeper, both with Broward County Transit, but also Miami-Dade, to get a better understanding of where they think a business case might help them. And perhaps a business case can also in turn be used to challenge them to aim higher. So I think that's
Randy,
one way.
again, one of the problems of us versus the land trust issue is, as I said, when I'm not a politician, I'm a zoning and land use lawyer, and I know that the value, or excuse me, the cost of land near the train stops, both Brightline and CSX, has already skyrocketed to private developers. So it's difficult to find that land now to put into a land trust so that you can get cheap land to the developers, because the appreciation, much of it has already occurred. This would have had to have been done 5 years ago or 10 years ago.
Right. I would say that it's perhaps a tool to consider for the long-term toolkit, that redevelopment usually does come around. It's not a one and done kind of thing. So, but it may not be our priority right away. I'd also be interested in hearing from our other steering committee members, just get some other comments or other ideas of how we might proceed.
I'll get to that next. Did you have anything else that you wanted to report before we open it up for next steps and additional comments?
Um, no, not right at the moment. I may send out a follow-up. Okay.
Okay. We've got about 10 minutes left. I see James' hand up, and I'll ask anyone else who has comments to please raise your hand, and I'll call on you in the order in which I see you. James, you're recognized, sir.
Thank you, sir. First of all, thank you for the presentations. Very interesting and informative. Just wanted to comment about the transit-oriented development opportunity and upzoning. Don't have the specific information in front of me, but I know Miami-Dade County did go through a process of some rezoning around our Metro Rail transit stations, and we see that development in some of those areas has occurred, and those might be examples of maybe success, or at least moving towards those opportunities in South Florida. Also, as you're talking about the Atlantic Beltline and others, wanted just to mention, of course, the local rail to trail program we have, the underline, and now moving into phase 3, I think funding for phase 4. And our transit director, you mentioned that vacancy. Actually, he is moving over to be the executive director of the underline as well. And those two topics, of course, interrelate because a lot of that transit-oriented development is adjacent to the underline. So happy to bring those conversations into future meetings as needed, but just wanted to.
For those of us not from Miami-Dade, and I am pretty familiar with the underline, can you give us a minute or two on what the underline is?
Yeah, fantastic. So it is the space under the elevated Metro Rail. It's county-owned property that has been titled the M Path for many years, and really just an underutilized strip of grass and pavement. Meg Daly, who's a local visionary of this type of opportunity, basically has led over the last 7-8 years or so a redevelopment starting just on the southern boundary of the Miami River, going all the way down to Dadeland South. It'll be 10 miles when completed. They hired James Corner Field Operations, the same design group that designed the High Line in New York. And there are 2 of the 4 phases are now complete, as I mentioned, and phase 3, which will be now connecting it to the University of Miami, is under development right now. So I welcome you to come check it out.
Thank you. And Randy, can you get some more information on what they're doing? Is it all walking? Is it walking and biking? Is there any commercial, etc.? And share that with the CEDS, please.
Yep.
All right. I don't see any other hands right now. Are there any other hands? Not seeing any. My next question is, we are still proceeding. We have other meetings scheduled with the CEDS, but at some point in the near future, we're going to need to start to stop the data gathering and start to come in for a landing as to how we're going to be able to recommend and what we're going to be able to recommend. I believe that hopefully what we'll be doing is coming up with a government, and again, as most of you are private sector, I think, a joint public-private sector recommendation that, again, hopefully will go to groups like the Sun Sentinel, Miami Herald, to point out to them that development is not necessarily the evil demon that they're presenting it as. I was candidly, as I said, taken aback when the Sun Sentinel endorsed the challengers to both the mayors of Lauderdale and Hollywood, with the specific reason that they gave was that they were both, in the pockets of the developers and were supporting too much development in the downtown area, which is something I believe that they should be supporting. So we're hoping to get a document that would provide both a guideline as to how it should be done, but also political support for doing this. Does anybody have any comments or suggestions on the best ways of doing this? Bob or Dan, any comments? Any comments from Beacon Council? I'll take that as a no. Anyone? All right, well, then we'll continue to handle this in-house, and we'll get back with everybody. Is there anything else? Isabel, when is our next meeting? Or Randy? I know we meet quarterly. So have we chosen the date for that meeting so everybody can get that on their calendar now? Should be roughly 3 months from now. Rhoda?
We don't have it for 2025. I will follow up with Barbara in your office to get some dates that work, and I mean, we can continue keeping it the third Wednesday. It depends. I don't know how your 2025 calendar is looking like, but yeah, it ends for October, and I'll get with
So
Barbara.
look, November, December, sometime basically,
Maybe
January of
Third week.
2025.
Mhm.
And we'll let you know within the next several weeks so that you'll have ample time to get it on your calendars.
Yes.
Is there anything else that anybody wants to bring up? Any other comments before we end the meeting? Yes, George.
Senator Geller, just to thank everyone. I've taken very good notes. It was an incredibly packed meeting with data. It was a very good meeting. I'm going to be speaking with Rod, and we have a committee going on shortly, and I'll be bringing some up because I'm sure there will be comments, but I'd like to talk with him about it prior.
Great. And again, we will send to everybody copies of both the PowerPoint from Randy and the report from the FAU professor, Professor Rennie. Anything else? Any other comments, questions before we end the meeting? Going, gone. All right, I'd like to thank everybody for being here. We look forward to seeing you at our next meeting, and the meeting is now over.
Thank
Thank
you.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you.
Thank you,
for
everyone.
coming.